Well, hey you guys, here I am once again doing another Flickers of Fear. So, you might have noticed the last week or two, I've kind of been trying to, it's a little bit of a mini quest, I guess, where I'm trying to kind of watch like some really talked about new films, mostly horror films, but I just put up a review of Poor Things, which isn't exactly a horror film. It's not a horror film at all, but I wanted to put up a review of that. And also, if you didn't see it, I actually went to the theater to see Late Night with the Devil, which of course all the horror fans are talking about nowadays, which is incredible, by the way. And we actually did a live stream review of that like last Monday, if you missed out on that. But I have to say that when I was on, looking around lists and stuff like that of like top rated horror movies of this year, Late Night with the Devil was number one, and rightfully so because I loved that. But the second one down, and one that a lot of my, other horror channels that I watch were talking about, was a little movie called Stopmotion. Now, I believe this did get a limited theatrical release in the United States. Unfortunately, it did not play anywhere around here, not that I was aware of anyway. However, I did end up actually paying, I think it was $6.99 to stream it. It's available on several streaming platforms. I paid for it on Amazon Prime, but I thought, if it's a good horror movie, a good indie horror movie, I don't mind paying that much to support it. Like I said, I would have gone to the theater to see it, but obviously it wasn't playing anywhere around here. So this movie is actually a British psychological horror film, and it premiered at Fantastic Fest in Austin back in September of 2023. So Stopmotion is the feature-length directing debut of a filmmaker named Robert Morgan. He's actually won a whole bunch of awards for his short films going back to the early 2000s. And this first feature film that he made, very clearly a labor of love for him, and it utilizes obviously, because of the title, a lot of his kind of signature stop motion animation, and sort of blends it pretty seamlessly with live action to just. This is a very like craftsman movie, it seems like it wasn't made, it was crafted, if that makes any sense. And the movie is like pretty unsettling, you know what I mean? Kind of quietly unsettling, but unsettling nevertheless. And it has kind of draws from a lot of influences, maybe like Repulsion, the Roman Polanski movie. I was kind of reminded of that a little bit. Eraserhead, obviously the David Lynch movie. Phil Tippett's Mad God, which of course everybody's talking about, which is all stop motion. And kind of the work of the Quay brothers as well, like who did a lot of short films back in the day. I believe they did some of those Tool videos that came out in the 90s. I'm pretty sure that was them. So if you like that style, like of the Quay brothers, you will probably dig this as well, because the stop motion in this, it's mostly live action, but it does have a lot of stop motion components to it. So if you like that look, then you'll probably really dig this. So yeah, so saying all that stuff around about all the influences and stuff, obviously that's some impressive shoes to fill there. And I'm going to say the director does seem, more than up to the task. I will admit that even though I loved the overall look of this movie and the kind of the vibe of it, I felt like it fell a little short for me, like of being really great. I kind of wish it had leaned harder into the weirdness and the surrealism, instead of, because the thing about it is that it's weird and it has like creepy weird imagery and it's metaphorical, but it's a pretty simple story that just kind of has flourishes of surrealism to it, you know what I mean? And I kind of feel like it would have been, I'm not saying it had to go full on Mad God, which was like completely experimental and stuff like that, but I kind of wish it had been a little bit weirder. So it wasn't like great, but it was like still pretty good, like pretty solid, So the main actress in this is Aisling Franciosi, who was also in The Nightingale, and she was in Last Voyage of the Demeter, too, now that I'm thinking about it. So she plays a character named Ella Blake, and she is a stop-motion animator. And she also happens to be the daughter of, like, a legendary stop-motion animator. Her mom's name is Suzanne Blake, so she's supposed to be, like, everybody in the field, like, knows who she is, you know what I mean? So we don't spend a huge amount of time like establishing the relationship between these two characters, but you really don't have to. It really only takes maybe 2 minutes of like watching them interact with one another, and it becomes very, very clear that Suzanne, the mom, is really overbearing and really controlling, and in some ways essentially kind of sees her daughter the same way that she sees the kind of puppet figures that she uses to make her movies. Now, Suzanne, it so happens, has developed crippling arthritis and has kind of lost the use of her hands to a great degree. So she's insisting that her daughter Ella help her finish this last film that she's working on, because this is the last one. She wants to finish it before she dies, right? And Ella obviously has to care for her in many other ways too, like she has to cut her meat and do things for her because she can't really use her hands, you know what I'm saying? Now Ella is, kind of in her mid to late 20s, I want to say, and she's kind of resentful about this, especially because, the way her mom treats her is kind of like not real grateful for the help, I guess. And also Ella is an artist in her own right, and she wants to make her own movie. Like, she wants to do her own work. She doesn't want to have to be constantly forced to kind of expend all her energy on someone else's vision. You know what I mean? Which, like I said, is understandable. So the first few scenes of the movie kind of establish not only this sort of toxic relationship that the mother and daughter have, but also does a good job of setting up how tedious and how isolating the creation of stop motion animation is, like, in real life. You know what I mean? The movie does a good job of, like, really showing the tedium and how solitary it is. So not too long into the story, Ella gets something that feels like it's a terrible thing that happens, like, in objectively, but from her point of view, maybe not so much. And it kind of feels a little bit like a lifeline or, some hope or something. Her mom kind of collapses from a stroke, and she goes into a coma. Now, initially, Ella is guilty and thus continues to work on her mother's film because she promised they would finish it before her mom died, and now she doesn't know, like, if her mom's ever going to wake up again or whatever. So she's like, well, I have to finish it. And so she has a boyfriend named Tom, and he is pretty supportive of her, and he's like, hey, why don't you, move in with me for a while until your mom gets better. You can kind of get out of that house for a little while. But Ella decides that she's actually going to rent a little of a studio apartment on her own so she can work on the movie without being distracted constantly. Now, not too long after moving into this apartment, though, she meets this weird, very nosy little girl who I don't think is ever given a name, now that I'm thinking about it, and there is a reason for that, but I'm not going to say what it is. Now, this little girl ostensibly lives in the same building. We never see her parents or anything like that. Now, this girl who kind of just invites herself into the apartment one day, she's like, hey, that looks neat, I'm coming in. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. So she's real interested in, what Ella is doing, but she doesn't particularly like the movie that Ella is working on, which is her mom's film, right? It's kind of it's about like a pair of Cyclops monsters, essentially. I'm not really sure what they're doing because you only see like a few seconds of it here and there. So the little girl thinks this movie is really boring, and she's like, hey, I have an idea. Why don't you, Ella, make something else? And she starts giving Ella an idea for a new story, which will presumably not be boring. So in this new story, the little girl suggests that there's this little girl in the woods who's being chased by a monster, sort of, that she calls the Ash Man. And then there's kind of like a little bit of lore about this, like, oh, first time he sees you, and then he touches you, and there's this whole thing. So as the movie goes on, the girl, like, starts giving Ella tips on creating the puppets for the film, using all kind of sort of yucky components. Like, at first it's just like mortician's wax, which isn't that yucky. But then it's like, hey, why don't you use this raw steak, and why don't you use this dead fox I found in the woods, and stuff like that. Because she's like, I want it to look more like, she's like, it has to be made of something dead, like these puppets. So there's that. As Ella and this little girl who's collaborating with her are working on this movie, Ella's grip on sanity, I guess, starts to waver. Actually, that's underselling it. It actually pretty much just goes hurtling off a cliff at some point. So, and what happens is, like, the stop motion world of her movie starts bleeding into reality. So you're not really sure where the edges of reality are or like what she's imagining. You know what I mean? And there's also kind of an added component too. And I think this is something that is not spelled out explicitly, but is kind of like an undercurrent, that because Ella was under her mother's thumb before and was like resentful that she couldn't make her own way or wasn't allowed to make her own movie or have her own voice. So she starts working on this new thing, but she still needs this little girl to give her these ideas. And it's like at one point she has an argument with the little girl and she's like, well, I don't need you. I can come up with my own ideas, but she can't. So I think that that's something that's also contributing to her loss of sanity, is that she realizes that maybe she doesn't have a voice of her own. So, I mean, the story, as I alluded to earlier, it doesn't really have any twists or any surprises to it. Like, there's no big twist ending or any kind of shocker or anything like that. I mean, it's essentially a pretty simple descent into madness kind of narrative about essentially like an artist, like I said, trying to find their own voice. Maybe they don't have one, but they end up kind of sacrificing everything for their art, that as well. The movie does have metaphorical aspects to it, especially in regard to like the use of puppets and the human control of puppets, you know, and people being puppets and stuff like that. But, you know, obviously that metaphor is not obscure at all. This isn't really a movie with multiple interpretations, is what I'm saying. It's just kind of like, it's metaphorical, but the metaphor is like pretty obvious, you know what I'm saying? So the story is like very, very straightforward. And so even though the imagery of the movie tends toward this really creepy, because the puppets are super creepy, okay, I will give it that, and they're kind of surreal, but this to me, it reads like an art house film, but a really, really straightforward, accessible one, if that makes any sense. Also, this movie is pretty gory in places. Like, I've kind of seen a lot of other reviewers and stuff saying, oh my god, it's the goriest thing ever, which not by a long stretch, you know what I mean? Not as long as like Dead Alive or Terrifier exist. But there are some scenes in this that if you are bothered by kind of body horror type stuff, like real squicky body parts, like chunks of skin being pulled off, like in loving close-up, stuff like that, you might not want to get, because it's not a bloodbath or anything, but it does have like a couple sequences in it that are pretty gruesome. So if you don't want to see that, then maybe give this one a pass. But it's not the goriest thing ever, not by any stretch of the imagination. So obviously this movie is not going to be for everyone. I mean, you know, what is? Nothing is. It has kind of it's a little bit slow in the first act. And I'm a person that likes kind of slow burn kind of movies, and this was a little bit slow even for me. The first act is a little bit like light on there isn't a huge amount of dialogue in the whole thing, now that I'm thinking about it. Not that I have a problem with that, but I'm just saying it is a little bit slowly paced. And in a way, I think that works because the pace is it's very patient. And it kind of mirrors the sort of slow and steady theme that you get, because obviously when you make stop motion animation, it's very, you know, it's very regulated and it's very slow and the movie is kind of paced to reflect that. I'm not saying that it's like super boring or it's not, but it's just it's very deliberately paced. It's very patiently paced. So if you don't have a lot of patience with that, then this might be a little slow for you. So I'm just telling you that right now. But I will say the acting is great across the board, particularly Aisling Franciosi and the little girl. They're kind of the two main characters. They're both fantastic, and their interactions are like really good. The visuals in this are probably the best thing about it. They're very grotesque and very like disquieting. Like I said, if you liked the sort of the Quay brothers, that weird animation with like the real creepy looking dolls that are kind of all crooked and shit like that, like it kind of looks like that. So if you like that kind of look, like I said, kind of like Mad God, but not as crazy as that, then you'll really dig the visuals in this. Also gotta say, I think a lot of the grossness of this could be contributed to like the sound design, which is like really squelchy. And it's like, so that really kind of helps in making it seem maybe grosser than it actually is, because the sound effects are just like, ugh, you know what I mean? It's kind of like that. So, as I mentioned, this movie didn't hit me nearly as hard as, my other recent horror experience, which was Late Night with the Devil, which, like I said, I fucking loved that, and I thought it was an instant classic. But this movie, Stop Motion, is, still like a really solid, really creepy flick. It was obviously made with tremendous love and just meticulous care by somebody who has a shit ton of experience in this subject matter, obviously, because it was made by someone who is also a stop motion animator and has made several films, utilizing that. So, but I'm going to say, like, overall, I would recommend that you watch it, especially if you're like a really big fan of, one, stop motion animation, or two, just indie horror in general, because it's doing something a little bit different. And I like that creative, independent, obviously made with love horror movies like this are getting some mainstream attention and even getting like limited theatrical releases, which is really, really cool to see. So I do recommend that people support movies like this, so we can get more of the good stuff. You know what I mean? If you can't see this in the theater, obviously I don't even know it's playing anymore. It didn't play anywhere near me, unfortunately, but I did see that it played in some bigger cities. You can pay to stream it like I did. Like I said, I saw it on Amazon Prime. I think it was $6.99. The price might come down a little bit. Or I did hear that this movie was coming to Shudder at the end of May. I believe it was May 31st, something like that. So if you have Shudder and you don't want to pay to see it, then you can wait and watch it on Shudder, because Shudder did actually like contribute to the making of this film as well. So, Shudder did went into like Late Night with the Devil too. So they're kind of killing it lately, gotta say, because this was actually like really good. So yeah, if you're into kind of slow burn metaphorical horror with just kind of a simple, straightforward kind of story and some like real disturbing imagery, then you will probably really dig stop motion. So, check it out. And that will do it for this Flickers of Fear. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please remember, like, share, subscribe, and comment, and all of that kind of stuff. And I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.